My name is George Mironescu. I lead the app development and delivery research for IDC in Europe. And I have the pleasure to share this Zoom stage with Sarah Poland, field CTO at HashiCorp, with whom I will be talking about platform teams as an evolution of DevOps. So first I will share some of our research and findings on the state of app delivery market, the realities we see out there, and the triggers behind the emergence of these teams to enable organizations to build and ship software faster, more efficiently, and in a compliant fashion. And then Sarah will take over the stage, introducing some of HashiCorp's views on this emerging topic, and then we will get into conversation and finally take questions from the audience, as Charlotte mentioned. So before I get into the presentation, just to know the insights and the stats that we as IDC will be referencing come from our DevOps and Accelerated Application Delivery Survey, which is a survey that we have been conducting in Europe every year for the past 7 years. Last year, interviewing over 600 senior leaders and practitioners from the domain. So with that, let's get into it. So first of all, an update on what most dev and delivery teams focus in 2024 and how the business mandates are changing and how they're how that trickles down to the dev and delivery organization. Compared to what we saw during 2022 and 2023, where the focus was sharply on customer experience and innovation through software, the behaviors, the attitudes are more operations focused in 2024, including driving efficiency, so getting more efficient and optimizing the app delivery infrastructure, environments, tooling. A lot of attention is put into increasing quality, where that can mean improving the quality through which software is shipped. So, for instance, higher cohesion and architectural alignment, better compliance, better governance, better quality of interactions between groups, and of course, better quality of the software artifacts that are being produced. There's still very high focus on increasing velocity of development and delivery. This is very clearly a top mandate that we see coming from the CIO and the senior IT leadership, but also from the head of development and the architecture group. And that's because even though we see progress being made in terms of speed, still 60% of the market, for 60% of the market, it takes at least 3 weeks to implement a software update in production. So to be competitive in a world that's driven by software, organizations need to industrialize capabilities, and particularly so around cloud-native operations. What we see is that 60% of organizations are still on a path to maturing their processes to build modern cloud apps. And that puts them in a position of risk relative to organizations that have ready their delivery engines for cloud-native. We see that roughly 40% of the market has refined and standardized their cloud-native operations in a fairly systematic manner, where a quarter of this population, so that would be roughly 1 in 10 organizations at the total market level, evolved to the most mature stage, where they have a continuous improvement scheme in place. And then in terms of where cloud native is in terms of penetrating the custom apps stay deployed in clouds, we see that for 2023 being at 26%, roughly a quarter of the state, but we see big ambitions to progress that over the next 12 months. So this paints a contrasting picture between the reality of today and also the ambitions projected. So ramping up development and delivery as a capability, working effectively towards the DevOps goals, and then scaling cloud native, this is going to be rather difficult given the state of app dev and delivery today. We see that in a typical work week, development teams focus less than 40% of their time on building new application functionality. So that would be effectively Thursday and Friday, while Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, teams are bogged down by things which don't necessarily contribute new value. And so we see them swamped in things like maintaining and patching environments, tuning and monitoring infrastructure, configuring and provisioning resources, implementing CI/CD processes and automating workflows and pipelines. So the current productivity and performance levels don't help much. And then at the higher level, the biggest challenges facing app dev and delivery teams relate to, first of all, limited ability to catch up with the volume of change requests, so pretty much backlog, a widening gap between legacy and cloud, reliance on legacy platforms and technologies, access to or availability of relevant skills, and then technical complexity. There's a spaghetti of systems, code and stacks there. So platform implementations and strategies have not necessarily been ideal. 3/4 of organizations in Europe do have in place an internal development and delivery platform. However, things don't stand great. 1 in 2 developer practitioners are not giving high marks of satisfaction about their internal platform environments. It's rather a lukewarm reception to them. And as a likely consequence to that is that these people will probably go somewhere else to build and deploy, despite clear policies to use their designated internal platforms. We see that 60% of organizations in Europe recognize they have shadow development taking place in their organizations, despite mandatory use of internal dev and deploy platforms. And within our survey, we see what are the key limitations hindering development teams and inhibiting usage of internal dev and delivery platforms. First of all, it's the limited catalog of integrations with tooling that developers use. It's rigid controls and limited options for developers to choose their services, their configurations, their environments. It's low functionality compared to public cloud solution offerings, and limited automation of development workflows. So there is plenty of room for improvement there. The need for new approaches and design is rather evident. So to work towards driving more agility, more efficiency into app dev and delivery, and to industrialize towards a modern capability, you need to look at the constraints and address those, where the key pains in modern environments, as we collect them from the market, are first of all tedious work, so navigating through manual routines, which drives the need for automation across workflows and pipelines to deeper automation. Understanding and managing the complexity of code and data relationships and dependencies, so the need to facilitate simplification for developer teams. Working in lockstep with other teams, this is something that has not been resolved, and so collaboration is something for people at a higher level to enable through tooling, through workflow design, and also through new cultural approaches. And then keeping up to date with technical innovations, so providing support, taking away from maker teams tasks which relate to maintaining, configuring, provisioning systems and tooling. This is something that emerges fairly clearly. So on the back of all this, we see platform teams taking shape to drive improvements in operations and organizational performance and productivity. We see that over 60% of organizations indicated their developers juggle daily between 6 and tools. And then 1/3 of that demographic handles more than 10 tools daily. So there is a need for higher level direction, consolidation, and road mapping. And the most important strategy considerations that organizations in Europe tell us, they would pick up to improve performance and productivity in delivery relate to, first of all, very clearly unifying developer experience, then driving modernization in the app estate, and then reducing context switching. Unifying developer experience in particular, this is very clearly the number one consideration for each role out there in app delivery. So ranging from the heads of app development to dev practitioners, to senior IT leadership, to architects, to platform leads, to infrastructure engineers, this is very clear. Now, in terms of top areas for specific tooling that platform teams are prioritizing in 2024 with a view on improving productivity, we see, first of all, facilitating deeper automation and testing, streamlining CI/CD processes, and then enabling software engineering based on bots and particularly Gen AI bots. So we also see platform teams taking form to drive improvements in security and compliance, systems alignment, and cost. At the end of 2023, less than 40% of organizations had in place well-defined security and governance processes. And we see, however, that the intentions are fairly big to address that. Almost 3/4 of the market plans to put in place structured GRC processes over app delivery this year. In terms of impact of poor architectural decisions, so these would be scalability of systems, technical debt accumulation in systems, and security of systems. These emerge clearly from our survey as the most negatively impacted by suboptimal design in an organizational digital landscape. So to prioritize a system level design, redesign, beyond security, organizations, we see them looking at the cloud native stack, so both the app and the infrastructure layer. Again, modernizing legacy environments to facilitate less cognitive toil on teams and more speed, and then laying the fabric for deeper IT and application integration. And then in terms of costs, the stats are rather clear, and hence the rise of FinOps and the need for better cohesion in app delivery regarding operating expenses. So to summarize, we observe platform teams becoming instrumental in driving architectural alignment, consistency, and standardization, as well as empowerment for development teams, particularly since developer experience is such a big topic for many organizations. Platform teams are also key to set policies and enforce security, compliance, governance. We see them as playing a key role in facilitating DevSecOps and shifting security closer to developers and ensuring a clean software supply chain is provisioned. And they can also help in enforcing financial control and cost discipline. So, key considerations when blueprinting platform teams, first of all, start from what the business wants to achieve, what are the higher level business objectives and how those can be incorporated from an app delivery standpoint, including defining metrics and KPIs to measure against progress and initiative success, and also make sure to have participation and involvement from all constituencies across the software delivery chain. Definitely everyone needs to be brought in the process. We see that today still less than 10% of organizations in Europe have a unified approach in app delivery, bringing together security, quality assurance, ops, business, and developers. So making sure that everyone buys into this process and that the platform people engage not just with development, but also with security, with IT governance, with cloud infrastructure, with the business is there to optimize for the best app delivery choices. So with that, what I will do now is I will stop presenting and I will let Sarah take over the stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, George. I really love hearing your recap because I think we're very much going to iterate some of the same things. So it's lovely to know that the industry is kind of sounds like it's finally aligning and moving in the same direction. For those of you that I don't know and haven't had the opportunity to interact with, my name is Sarah. I'm the field CTO for HashiCorp. And I'm by and large here to connect with customers and people in the field, understand what some of the trends are happening in organizations, and then help our customers really start flushing some of this out, and help with the digital transformations. Give me a second to share my screen here. There we go. All right. Yeah, so as George was explaining, we're really seeing a shift in the market, and I wholeheartedly agree that platform engineering and this idea of platform teams is really just the next iteration and scalability of the DevOps movement, trying to help teams to really consolidate some of their communication, and help them deploy applications faster, reduce time to market, and that in a more consistent fashion as well. So if we look at some of the things that Gartner's saying, we're obviously seeing a massive increase in spend. And I think that especially with AI, and the compute power that's required behind some of these LLMs, and just generally speaking, that spend is going to continue to increase. What isn't shown here, though, is that most organizations are about 35% over budget when they start looking at their cloud spend and their cloud resources. So then the question becomes, how do we get a little bit more control on what's happening and make sure that organizations, both from a security and risk standpoint, but also from just the broader cost overview, are really on target and spending within the projected means that organizations have seen. And what we're seeing is that it's really a threefold process here. So the shift to cloud, yes, there's a ton that's about tool-centric, but it's becoming less about the point-to-point tooling, and it's really becoming more about the workflow. So how do we implement a workflow that starts with a pull request or a single entry point, and then propagates us all the way through that development process, so that there is this self-service available and developers aren't waiting for infrastructure to be able to execute that. And so if we look at what's behind these driving factors, tools, absolutely, how are you structuring your cloud journey, and how are you structuring some of that digital transformation from a tooling standpoint, but also making sure you have the right people and skills in place, as well as processes. I had the opportunity to attend a conference a few days ago, and one of the things that they were saying is, from a CIO standpoint, talent development is actually one of the most critical things and at the forefront of everyone's mind, because there's just, the industry is evolving too quickly. And with the evolution of the industry, it's very difficult to keep a skilled up workforce. So how do you build in some of this talent development and education into the actual time budget that you're allowing for employees, so that your team can really keep skilling up and keep delivering for your organization? And then processes, how do you work all of these different layers into this development process so it's a little bit more of a seamless workflow? Does it make sense to do the ticketing like we've always done it, or do we need to look at maybe a different entry point? Is there a way that we can codify a lot of this? And I think we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but what are some of the roles of things like AI and AI ops when it comes to processes and processes management? to George's point in terms of productivity, what we've seen over time is that since post-World War II, most industrialized nations and most developed nations have actually decreased in productivity. Part of that is because of the complexities of some of the systems that we're putting in place. The other part is that the cost of labor is going up because we're requiring more and more skilled labor on the market. So looking at that and looking at the complexities actually drives some of the productivity down. And that's according to the OECD. So then, how we typically see customers and some of the organizations that we're working with, to George's point, it's very much kind of a threefold process as well. They really start with that pure DevOps in mind, picking the tools that suits each individual team. Each developer can say, I want to use Terraform and Kubernetes, and I think in this case, I want to use an open source or source available edition. But what we're seeing is that as these open source projects, and I do want to call out that they are projects because they change, and that's required. I think, the open source community has a huge part to play when it comes to innovation. But then that brings us into that second step of how do we standardize that innovation? Because it's great to use that innovation, and we have to. If we look at the Japanese car industry from the 90s, what they did really well was to really streamline their processes, and they were absolute geniuses when it came to that, but they forgot to innovate. And as a result, that profit margin really stagnated, and they've had a hard time coming to the next kind of cycle of innovation as a result. So yes, we have to innovate, but we also have to be able to standardize that, especially as we drive large organizations, because it's very difficult to get 10,000 people to move in the same direction to execute on one thing and deliver business logic, which is ultimately what these application teams are being driven to do. And then once we're able to standardize some of this and make it more programmatic based off of products as opposed to projects, what we can then do is move into the scaling and really start automating things and innovating and taking advantage of productivity and innovation at the same time to drive our businesses forward. So our average organization that we see initially when they start with the ITIL process, and I actually come from the financial services industry, so I think this number here, 22 weeks, is extremely optimistic. But typically what we see is about 22 weeks from development all the way through to production. And that's because each time you have to file a ticket and wait for the corresponding team to come back to you, something like a VN might be pretty quick. It's pretty straightforward. In my experience, things like network take a lot more time and there's a lot more back and forth. So then the question is, how, using platform engineering, can we then move this to more of a 5-minute process? How do we look at this to say, okay, despite having a very dynamic organization and infrastructure, how do we make sure that that workflow remains the same? And how do we focus on the workflow so that it's end to end and not point to point, which makes it easier then to execute on this idea of DevOps and continuous deployment and integration. And so how we really see this is that you have your application teams and you have your platform teams, and where they come together in the middle is very much how you deploy and how you come up with a seamless workflow from end to end. And ideally, it's easiest to start with the public cloud because there are lots of built-in functions and features to make sure that you can anchor things like identity. But then also we see organizations then move into their private cloud estate, and they're able to use this same construct and the same build out to be able to seamlessly deliver all of their infrastructure and support their applications and their business logic in the same way, whether that's public estate, private estate, hybrid, however you would like to see that. And the way that we do this and be able to see the differentiation between essentially, the different types of, well, to be able to delineate between how you would start a program and how you would build out your program are sort of twofold. Sometimes we see our customers and our organizations start with what we would consider to be infrastructure lifecycle management. So everything from machine imaging all the way through infrastructure as code, and what are some of those entry points and abstractions, so that people don't need to know what's going on under the hood. They can just click a button or hit a pull request, and that's going to deploy the type of infrastructure and configuration management that's required, so that they can have all of these dynamic infrastructures and deploy things out with this idea of beginning, middle, and end. So it stays quick, homogeneous, but the time to market then is drastically reduced because we are reducing that context switching. They don't need to think about infrastructure versus application. It's the same thing, same deployment process. Doesn't matter where you start, doesn't matter where you're going, and it doesn't matter how you end. And then the secondary approach to that, and a layer on top of that, would be the security lifecycle management. Now, these two things are obviously very, very deeply integrated together, but sometimes how you would respond to these or what you would do to be able to manage these things can be a little bit different. So in the security lifecycle management, that's also what we would, serve up as security as a service. So how are you integrating the security as a service into your lifecycle management? So it's just a little bit more modular, but also highly, highly critical. And depending on the type of the organization, if you are an organization who's a little bit more cautious in the face of risk, typically we'll see organizations like that start with security lifecycle management. If you're an organization who's very concerned about your time to market and cost reduction, typically the initial focus becomes infrastructure lifecycle management, but then they meet in the middle. So if we look at infrastructure lifecycle management, what we're really focusing in on, and one of the things that or the three things by and large that we're looking at, are cost, risk, and speed. We want to make sure that we're using the resources that are available to us in a way that makes sense to the business. And in terms of risk, how can we make sure that on the cost side, people aren't spinning up extra large machines when a small one will do, and just blowing up cloud spend. But also, how do you make sure that they're not exposing things to the internet? So making sure that those policies and those templates that are already approved by architecture boards have been implemented. And then on the speed side of things, it's kind of self-explanatory, but whether that's the ticketing process, or just the fact that you don't have people manually typing things in or copying and pasting things out of an Excel sheet, really speeds up that whole process. And when we move then to something like security lifecycle management, again, on the cost, risk, and speed, we can do things like eliminate firewalls and make sure that our security is really streamlined, consolidating tools, but then also things like having a golden workflow, which allows us then to understand if there's a vulnerability, where that vulnerability is spread out. Working in some of these older organizations that have some of this technical debt that's associated with them, it's very difficult to find where individual packages are or the types of machines that people are running. So making sure that you can see that really helps reduce some of that risk. And even more so as we see more and more legislation roll out here within Europe. I think that that's becoming more and more of a focal point, and being able to remediate them in time within an RTO or an RPO is becoming critical. And again, on the speed side of things, fewer manual checks. I used to hate having to go in and go through the spreadsheet and take the screenshots to make sure that my pipeline did indeed require 4 eyes to get any kind of approval into the actual environment. So making sure that those are in place, so that again, we're removing a lot of that context switching, that we're alleviating some of the time constraints as well. So I hope that gave you a little bit of an overview. I know it was kind of quick, but I do believe we're going to jump in a little bit more to some meatier questions. And I'm really excited to speak with George as well about maybe some of his thoughts in terms of how things are evolving, particularly on that application layer, since by and large, I deal on a daily basis with a little bit more of the infrastructure layer.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
So I would like to start with the why, right? Why is this all happening? What do you see as, main trends in the market that led to this emergence of this notion of platform teams, platform engineering?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of twofold. One is we realized that DevOps just is very difficult to scale. There are very few organizations who have successfully scaled DevOps, and I don't think it's any secret that the ones that have scaled it successfully are the ones that can pay a fair amount of money, and probably above what is market value currently, which makes it really challenging for the rest of us to be able to find and especially retain the talent around that. Because if you have, this DevOps environment, an application that's been built up by a team of developers and engineers, and half the team walks, it becomes really difficult to maintain that continuity and to maintain that productivity to deliver the functions and the features that the business requires. And then on the other hand, I think it's very rare to find skills on the market of people who are capable of doing business logic and the software development, but then also be able to actually deploy their own applications and understand the infrastructure implications and the security implications underneath. And to a certain extent, I think as a business and as organizations, it's unreasonable for us to ask that of people, because we're asking people to be experts across the entire field and know the ins and outs of every single piece of infrastructure on different types of clouds. And if I look at my background, for example, I was a secrets management expert, but my day was spent on secrets management. So if you can justify a highly paid resource just for secrets management, how can we expect the broader community then to be experts across the entire board?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where we looked at platform engineering. And I think, it's been around now for a few years. I think 2019 was kind of the first time that it was really spoken about. And then you have people like Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais, who've really picked up, the different team topologies and have really been great advocates for this idea of platform engineering, because the scalability is there and because that can happen. I think there's also, on a macroeconomic level, we see that there's a lot of this platform and this platform product that's happening, Airbnb, Uber. And I think that does also inform what's happening on the insides of organizations, because people say, well, if they can do it for an external product, why can't we do that for an internal product? That brings about its own complications and challenges, especially if we as an industry aren't fully aware of how this is evolving or what we're looking at, or, the difference between a marketplace, for example, and a platform. But I think there is also that inflection from the broader macroeconomic scale.
We also noticed that platform engineering, platform teams as a notion is really boomed in 2023. And you don't hear people talking that often anymore about DevOps. Do you think DevOps is sort of going away, and platform as a notion is taking over? Do you think maybe they will coexist? What's your quick take on that?
I really just think that platform engineering is the next iteration of DevOps. They're trying to achieve very much the same thing. But we say, how do you make this more scalable? How do you make sure that people can do what they need to do? But maybe we need a few more rules. I like to joke that developers and my kids, I kind of go about in the same way. I give my kids choices, right? I think it's important for them to foster that, to have an opinion, to understand, you know, how to make a decision and the thought process behind that. But I'm also not going to give them choices that might harm the house
Yeah,
or
correct.
the family. I'm also not going to give them choices that might be unhealthy. So, here are 3 or 4 choices. You choose which one's best for you. I think the same thing kind of applies within this platform idea, and as businesses, the same approach should apply. Up till now, we've been saying developers do whatever you want within the realms of whatever you want to do. But the reality is it's not good for the business. It adds cognitive load and it's not healthy for the developers. We see a huge amount of burnout as a result. So, I think that, there are some similarities there, and platforming is a way of giving more structure and more scalability to DevOps.
Agreed. Agreed. I mean, just referring back to that study we presented, right? 60% of organizations have their devs handling, between 6 and 10 tools at any moment. That's fairly counter, productive in a way. So it's definitely there definitely is a need for more direction from a higher level.
Yeah, I think
So yeah.
if you look at human cognition also in neuroscience, um, you start getting really overloaded. The average human brain can make between 5 and 8 choices before you really start feeling that cognitive overload. So, like you say, 10 choices, 10 tools that you have to choose between, you've already maxed out your developers in terms of cognitively what they can manage.
Yeah. Um, I'll move now to the value question. So the question would be, why should I consider this? What's really the value I get from such an evolution?
I think speed, productivity for sure.
Yeah.
You also get more control over your environments. If everyone's doing what they want to, it's very difficult to see what's going on. As somebody with a security background, that always makes me a little twitchy. If somebody can just spin up basically whatever they want and run with that, it's very difficult as a security program to then come in and make sure that things are a little bit more continuous. And, you know, one of the things I joke about is living through Log4j. I was called 3 times in the middle of the night for a Go application. So nobody needed to call me. I really didn't need to be woken up at, 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then again at 6 o'clock in the morning. But because there was no way to really see what was going on or the ecosystem, that was the approach that had to be taken. And we had to be absolutely certain that all of that had been remediated. So by moving to a platform approach where you can see these golden workflows, you can feed your machine images then into your infrastructure as code, it's much easier to start eradicating some of these vulnerabilities as well. So there's a lot of benefit to it, I think.
Mhm. And so how should things be structured? How should this look like in practice?
I think as an industry, that's something we're still trying to figure out. It's very theoretical, or it has been very theoretical up until now. We're seeing more and more organizations kind of suss this out. I would be also curious to see or to hear what you've seen. I think usually we see there's a centralized platform team, and they're responsible for building out modules, and you start with that minimal viable platform, and then you kind of just build out from there. So as soon as a module that you build doesn't respond to, say, 70% of the organization and the organizational needs, you kind of start splitting that off and looking at, okay, do I need to go and follow a value stream and understand that maybe corporate IT needs something different than consumer IT? So there are different ways that you would look at that. I think Nike does the value stream, so they separate it out. I also like to separate it out by technical streams. So, you have the value streams, but also then the technical streams, and then feeding in some specialists where you need them.
I mean, our observations have been that you do have in place platform teams or teams that are in charge of some platform, right? But you've seen the stats. It's easily 3/4 of your organizations in Europe that do have some platform, but whether that is well organized and whether that functions properly, that's quite questionable when you look at the satisfaction with developers. And I think to a fairly sizable degree, the satisfaction you get is because the satisfaction levels you get is because very often people don't talk to each other. So you have the platform teams doing their own thing, setting the policies as they think they should be, giving access to tools that they think developers should use, and there's not necessarily much conversation between these groups.
Yeah.
So I think that's where people need to pay more attention from a structuring and organizational standpoint.
Yeah, I think I love if the platform team is the one who's building out the modules, and so you can have different types of I think organizational models when you're looking at platform teaming. But if the platform team is the one who's building out the models, using somebody from the platform team as an SRE or whatever you want to call it to embed within the application team becomes really critical, because as a platform team, you're building out a product, and these IT and application teams are then your customers. So making sure that you have that feedback loop to build a good product is really critical.
Yeah, I think the key here is really how do you treat your customers, your internal customers, right? And shift a bit the mindset from I'm just doing my job versus I'm really serving customers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously, the industry is talking a lot about AI. So AI ops, Gen AI. How do you see that from a HashiCorp standpoint and with an angle on platform teams? How can AI be weaved in to provide additional value or further value?
One of the terms that I've heard that is probably my favorite thing when it comes to AI is that it's not artificial intelligence, it's about boosting the collective intelligence. So what AI does really well are typically things that humans are not great at. And what humans do well, which is really the synthesis of lots of different inputs, AI typically doesn't do very well. We don't seem to, and according, to the statistics from the OECD and some of the ones that you've shared as well, we don't seem to do particularly well when it comes to productivity and linking processes together. So I have great hope that AI is really going to be able to help us boost some of that productivity. I know in Europe, for example, they're very focused on the digital economy. So how do we make sure that there's a better digital economy in place so that we can fortify the general economy a little bit better? So my hope is that AI ops can really start tying some of these things together. From a HashiCorp perspective, we're working with a lot of the hyperscalers to look at how can we pin some of these together, especially when it comes to infrastructure as code, to make sure that we're remediating some of misconfigurations and whatnot. One statistic I saw said that 9% of a company's revenue is lost simply through network misconfigurations. So if as an organization you can reduce that, by 70%, you're saving yourself quite a lot of money. Not to mention some security, some security scares, I'd imagine. So we're very focused on how to do that. Now, on the flip side, if you want to implement AI and if you really want to have a solid AI program, there's a lot of cleanup that's going to happen within a lot of major organizations. because things are too scattered. You can't understand where the data is, even the infrastructure itself. There's a lot of legacy that's left. So it's about how do you put all of this together and make sure that you're streamlining infrastructure as code wherever you can, and then laying the AI on top of that so that you can have a robust AI program and really start innovating on top of it.
Mm. Good. In terms of challenges, obstacles, what do you see as common obstacles to implementing a platform team, introducing a platform team in your organization?
People. It's always the people that's the hardest. And it's what I've struggled with in my career as well, is how do you get people on board? Particularly, I think there's a lot of fear right now about jobs and making sure that you still have a job. Especially, we see a lot of cuts happening. Most of those cuts have now been reabsorbed within other areas. But it's scary. It's really terrifying as an employee to say my job may just not be there tomorrow. And then what do you do? So making sure that that culture is in place to continue the innovation. If we loop back to AI a little bit, I think there's a huge fear there. But what we've seen with the first with the industrial revolution around the turn of the century, it's created a whole new job market. So I think what we can expect to see is just a different job market. And I don't think any of us know what that's going to look like or how we're going to respond to that. But helping people and employees understand that by automating things, by cleaning things up, no, you're not actually removing yourself from a job. You're creating more opportunities, and you're creating opportunities for innovation and reducing your likelihood of burnout as well. So it's really about that cultural shift. And I think that that's definitely the most challenging. And particularly from my perspective, when I was still on the customer side, there's some great tools that are coming out, but how do you get the people on board? And then once you have the people on board, creating the processes behind those to support that transition is also quite challenging.
Cool. I'll pick up an interesting question from the audience. So someone is asking, how are platform teams the next step in DevOps? It sounds like a step back, dev and ops separate again. What do you think about that? Is it truly a dev and ops separate again to you? Because to me, it's not necessarily. It's a rather separate construct organizationally from an organizational design standpoint.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I also think that as much as we wanted to separate, or we wanted to unify dev and ops, I don't think it ever happened really. The teams that I've worked in, you always had the ops guys within the team, and you always had the dev guys within the team. So I think it's a way of scaling that out so that you make the ops team more available to the platform team. But there's that weird intermediate integration point, to your point, that exists that hasn't existed before. So it's not like, you build the app in a traditional like build and run and then just chuck it over the fence and you don't care what happens afterwards. You still have to be able to run your own application, but having the products that really respond to what you need as an application team is really important.
And I would add, I think, I mean, like you say, most often dev and ops have been in separate groups, right? But from a methodology standpoint, I think the methodologies have been embraced to a smaller or a larger degree, depending on organization. And then obviously, like you mentioned, the products, right? The products have evolved with that view in mind. Now, where we're going, I think, yeah, we had so much option for developers in the past. We've spoiled them a bit. But I think we've reached a point where that is just a bit too much. And the industry is going back to some sort of consolidation of tooling. And therefore, you have this emergence of these platform groups. Sarah, I will thank you so much for this conversation. I will wrap up this session, and what I encourage everyone is to reach out to Sarah if you want to continue the conversation on how HashiCorp sees this topic and how it helps customers with this new topic in the market. And yeah, hope to see you in the next session with IDC. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.